Well, more than a week after it disappeared, the search goes on for Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. And investigators increasingly believe that the missing plane's flight path was very intentionally and deliberately changed from where it was supposed to go. Now, military personnel from dozens of countries are involved in the operation, and officials say the Boeing 777 may have flown in one of two radically different directions. The latest search area includes a large section of Central Asia and parts of the Indian Ocean. You can imagine the task at hand here. Pakistan, so we have some finality on at least one portion of that. Pakistan says the missing plane did not show up on its radar, so you can eliminate that. And citing military officials, the Times of India reports it would have been impossible for the flight to cross into India's airspace undetected. Malaysian investigators are also focusing on the flight crew to determine if they were involved in the plane's disappearance because of the timing of a verbal message that was sent to a control tower. Andrew Stevens is in Kuala Lumpur with the latest developments. So what is the latest in terms of this investigation looking into individuals on that plane?
Well, the latest we can tell you with any degree of certainty, Harla, is the fact that the police are still looking at that flight simulator that was taken from the captain's house about 24 hours ago. We don't know what was on it. There are reports coming from Reuters, among others, that included on that simulator was a program which shows you how to fly through all sorts of different types of weather. But that is a fairly normal thing to expect on a flight simulator. The co-pilot is also being investigated as well. Now, the Malaysian authorities are very clearly pointing to the sharp end of the investigation on the crew and to a lesser extent the passengers, although the passengers are obviously being very closely vetted. Let's just start with the crew first. This is because it has been confirmed that the final voice message from that cockpit to the ground came after one of the communication systems had been turned off. That means whatever was happening, whatever the plot was for MH370 was already in play when that person in the cockpit said, "All right, good night." We don't know whether that was the pilot. That has been the assumption, but we don't know that. So that's obviously keeping investigators very busy, just trying to establish what actually was said, what the backgrounds of the pilot and the co-pilot are. And all, on top of that, we've got 15 nationalities of passengers. They've all got to be checked. A lot of those will involve getting information from other countries. So that's where we are on the investigation. On the search just gets bigger and bigger. And basically, it goes from the depths of the Indian Ocean, which are some of the deepest places on the planet, to some of the very highest places on the planet, the Himalayas, and points in between, including the vast open areas of Western China. Take a listen to what the Defence Minister said yesterday.
The operation has entered a new phase. The search was already a highly complex, multinational effort that has now become even more difficult. The search area has been significantly expanded, and the nature of the search has changed. From focusing mainly on shallow seas, we are now looking at large tracts of land, crossing 11 countries, as well as deep and remote oceans.
So Malaysia has to deal with 25 other national governments on this search, coordinating those sort of assets. Also getting information from the 11 countries that the Minister spoke about there that the plane may have overflown. Now, what he's going to be asking for, obviously, is radar records, it's satellite records, communications records. Some of this information may and is very likely to be very militarily sensitive. So the Malaysians have to get that sort of information, get that buy-in from many countries to have an effective search plan going on, Harla. It's going to be difficult. This is a diplomatic sort of event now, if you like. But at the bottom of all this is still an enormous tract of land and sea that remains in question, where that plane could have ended up.
And, you know, we keep talking about when a satellite picked up a signal, when the transponder was turned off, when the ACAR system was turned off, when the last communication happened. I mean, all this is information that's dripping in. And there is some anger over the lack of information because precious time is slipping away. Is there a sense that Malaysia isn't working fast enough here?
There has been very much that sense that the Malaysian authorities have not been providing nearly enough information, not nearly quickly enough to the people who need it. There has been a pretty much constant barrage of criticism coming from China over the past few days. Frustrations obviously growing in Beijing, given that 153 of those people on the plane were Chinese nationals. China has been very vocal in saying we need accurate information and we need timely information. It's not just China, though. There has been concern spread unofficially, both from US sources we've been hearing, the fact that they're not getting the information they need quickly enough from the Malaysians. Listen also to what the Deputy Ambassador of Indonesia to Malaysia had to say yesterday.
For the last 8 days, the search was concentrated on the South China Sea. So we are not aware that the possibility of the airplane goes to the south. So that's why only now we are trying to look at the data recording, whether the airplane passed through Indonesian territory or not.
So 8 days, the Indonesians, as we heard there, did not search in an area which we now know the plane overflew. It may actually have even overflown the Indonesian mainland, unlikely, but certainly perhaps in territorial waters. That is the sort of frustration that countries have been experiencing. As I said before, no more so than in Beijing. Let's go to our Dave McKenzie now. He joins us live from Beijing. And David, I've been talking about sort of the anger at government level, also obviously families of the passengers. What are you hearing now from both Beijing and both from those families?
Well, you're right. From the families who have a very real connection, of course, and there's very real consequences to this mystery. There has been anger over the days, as we've reported, and boiling over in recent hours in meetings with airline officials. The airline was given the option to families to leave the hotel they've been put in, hundreds of them at this point, and the families clearly railed against the airline, saying they didn't want to do that. There's definitely a lack of trust between the families, Andrew, and the airline, and also the Malaysian government, with a great deal of finger-pointing. Then there's also the government level finger-pointing, both from official Chinese statements and from state media calling the Malaysian response a, quote, dereliction of duty at worst, and at very least a lack of information to help solve this mystery, Andrew.
Given the sensitivities of intergovernmental relations on something like this, David, does that strike you as unusually strong language from Beijing, sort of castigating, admonishing Kuala Lumpur?
Well, China is definitely normally very more muted in its foreign policy relations, though on certain regional issues it does generally sort of speak out more directly. In this case, it would be unusual given the fact that this is a search for a plane of which many nationalities are involved, and you would want to see cooperation, not criticism. But I think the Chinese government feels that the Malaysian actions, from its point of view, have been confused and not fast enough. Also consider the assets that China put in the South China Sea for days to search for this plane that wasn't there. There's also I think an issue of saving face here as well. If you remember, several days ago, China put out those images of what they said were a possible crash site of the plane in the South China Sea, Gulf of Thailand area. That turned out to be not the case, and the Malaysians very pointedly said that the Chinese admitted they made a mistake. So there's a great deal of national pride in this as well, and all this time the families are obviously struggling through this new information. As we get to this search, this massive search down to the south and up through the north, also a lot of sensitive information presumably is being sought from governments like China, including its satellite information over very sensitive areas like Xinjiang and Tibet and the northwest China territories around the stands. So whether China is cooperating behind the scenes, we don't know, but certainly out in the public sphere, they are trying to point the finger at other countries, including the US.
It's a very good point you mentioned, isn't it? Because that China intelligence from that part, from the northwestern parts of China on air flights is going to be critical in this ongoing search. Dave McKenzie in Beijing, thanks very much for that. It should be pointed out too, though, that this is an event of unprecedented proportions. The Malaysians are not equipped. Few countries would be equipped to deal with a crisis, a disaster on this level. 10 days on, and a plane carrying 239 souls, as we understand at the moment, disappearing off the face of the earth. It is an enormous task for the Malaysians to continue to keep on top of this operation. It'll be an enormous task for anybody. Anyway, we're going to have a lot more on this story in about 20 minutes from now. Right now, Newsroom is going to take a short break, and we'll be back with more on Ukraine in just a moment.